Hi, everyone. We're live on a couple different places here on our webinar and also on our Facebook page. Let me just move some things around here. I got lots of stuff happening. How's everyone doing today?
We're great.
Great. So welcome to our Cyberwise Chat. Today we're going to talk about something very exciting, cancel culture. But first, let me introduce who's here to this side. Hi, Pam. I'm going to do that thing. Dr. Pamela Rutledge, who's the director of the Media Psychology Research Center. Just below her, we're excited to have back Rick Andreoli, who's the editor-in-chief of Parentology, which is a great site in case you haven't checked it out. And below me, we have Arius Collins, who just rushed in from teaching a class. And she's our community manager at Cyberwise, and she'll be manning our chat box. So if you have any questions today, make sure that you ask them to us. So welcome. I'm actually excited about this topic that was recommended by Rick. Thank you. And I've got a little background here. I've got it written down. So apologize for looking this way. So we're going to talk about this phenomenon called cancel culture, which I'm sure most of you have heard the term. However, I learned by doing a little research that only about 50% of Americans really understand what it means. So I'll do a very quick definition. It's when a person or brand is called out for a certain behavior or belief. They are, in effect, punished or canceled as retribution for that behavior. So a person might be blocked or silenced on social media, or in real life, they might lose a job or other opportunity. In the case of a business, they might be boycotted. In the case of kids, they might get shut out of their social groups, either on social media or sometimes even in real life. So that's a very succinct definition that we're going to really dive into today. But I want to give you a real life example that you may have heard of about the Mandalorian actress, Gina Carano. She was recently fired by Disney after posting on social media that being a Republican in 2021 was similar to being Jewish during Nazi Germany. Her Hollywood agent dropped her, and Hasbro scrapped her Star Wars action figure. So those were the consequences of getting canceled. So real quick, before we get into this discussion, I had a real life example that I already shared with this group, but I'll share with you. As some of you may know, I teach cyber civics to middle school students, and we were having a class. It was on Zoom, and some child gave an opinion that wasn't very popular. And in the chat box, I saw, "You're canceled." And so I stopped the class and I said, "Just out of curiosity, do you know what that means?" And then the person who posted it said, "Actually, I have no idea." So I thought that was so cute and so, apropos to what we're talking about today, how these cultural things, kids are watching and they pick up on it, and sometimes they start using it and it has ramifications and they don't even know why. So I'd like to talk about that today. All right, so let's start with you, Pam. For those of you who don't know, Pam wrote a great article that you can find on Parentology about cancel culture, telling us in essence that this is nothing new, this behavior. So can you explain that, Pam, a little deeper?
Well, sure. Cancel culture has a long heritage. People have always used public shaming to control others' behaviors. Now, it has been used also in positive ways, in like the civil rights movements, to boycott things, to raise attention to things. But as we were talking about a little bit earlier, there's also a heritage of canceling that comes out of fan behavior. So related to various kinds of fan groups where they don't like an actor, or they don't like an actress, or they don't like the way something is cast, and they sort of rally their troops together to try and create change, to try and stop someone from acting or to force recasting. So all of these things have come into this big melting pot these days, which is part of the reason why your students really don't understand what it is, because it now has so many definitions. It's become almost a meme, to cancel someone. And we're just seeing it everywhere. And so social media has really changed the definition through the speed and amplification of the process.
Right. And I know, Rick, you have covered it in various different ways on Parentology. So you always have your finger on the pulse of kind of the most, the biggest and most flagrant examples of this thing. Can you give us some?
Yeah. So there's two sides of it as well. There's call out culture, which is where you just call somebody out. And that's more about what Pam's talking about in terms of political activism. Canceling is where you go the step further, which is like, okay, I've called you out, you're not doing what I want or what I think is appropriate, and now I'm going to try to get retribution, which, you know, so the Gina Carano was the example you gave. And she had been called out for a lot of her behavior for some anti-trans statements she'd made. And then it all culminated in that moment where she compared being a Republican to being a Jew in Nazi Germany. But similarly, like Helena Duke, we reposted it onto the Parentology website this morning. She was the young woman who wanted to go to some of the Black Lives Matter protests, and her mom wouldn't let her because those protests were too violent, is what the mom said. And then the girl is on social media and sees her mom and uncles in the Capitol riots where they were storming the Capitol building. And so she called out her mom on social media, on Twitter, and posted the photo and literally like says like, hey mom, you know how you said Black Lives Matter protests were too violent? How's that working out for you? You know, something along those lines. Like, so that's sort of the call out, canceling her own parent kind of thing. And then there are more extreme examples, like Pam was talking about in fan culture. Kelly Marie Tran, who is the Asian American actress who was in the last 2 Star Wars movies, fans for one reason or another just didn't like her. And so they decided to cancel her, but she didn't do anything politically wrong. She didn't do anything that offensive. She didn't say anything racist, but for some reason, a group of fans didn't like her. So they decided to cancel her. And that's where cancel culture kind of turns into cyberbullying, because they're sending horrific things about her race, about her weight, her looks, her acting, all of these things against this poor woman. And she had never done anything to warrant that.
That's such a great point, that cancel culture happens without evidence because
Right.
people are so reactive. There was an incident at college where students saw a professor attending a Back the Blue rally. He wasn't chanting, he wasn't carrying a sign. He was interested in hearing their side of the argument because he hadn't heard it. And he was trying to make sense of this whole, how could people be against each other? But this spread among the student body, and the students started dropping his class. And so now he has no students in his class. So he was tried before, proven guilty. So I think that there's a big emotional reactive thing that's going on. I think it's exacerbated by COVID because everybody's at home angry anyway. So I think that that's such a great example of from Star Wars, is people just venting.
Yeah. So there's so many things going on here that I hope that we get time to address. And just so people watching know, we're going to post this at the end and also give you takeaways for parents on how to help kids make sense of all this. But I did want to share one email we got because it really touches on something. Well, 2 things that I think are super important. So here's what we got. What do you make of the language that is being used when people use the word cancel? It seems to imply that people are merely characters on shows, or perhaps that the actions and beliefs of a particular person can be thought of as a show that might be canceled at any moment. Do you think this comes from a general lack of meaningful engagement with digital forms of media, i.e. being a passive recipient of a TV show rather than actively analyzing and coming to understand what a particular show may reflect about culture, politics, identity? Thank you. That comes from Adib Syed, who's a learning experience designer. There's so many great points that he touched on here. And, you know, the lack of critical thinking, which is something I think about a lot, especially teaching cyber civics, and also the fact of being a consumer rather than a participant in our media. So
I'm not going to agree with that.
really, well, tell me what you think about that.
Right, because what we're seeing is people thinking they do have some participation.
Yeah.
In other words, if they were passive victims, or if the passive audience, they wouldn't be reacting in this kind of way.
Yeah.
But they see evidence all
Yeah.
the time
Yeah.
that these sort of mob events can make change, but for better, for worse, for legitimate or not. And so you see even staged cancels, right? In the beauty YouTube world, right? When James Charles and Taddy Westerbrook, and they, hated each other, and then all the fans started canceling each other, the other team. And
yeah, I mean, it's possible to do this as a consumer too. Like think about before we had social media, you watch a TV show you didn't like, you write a letter, you tell your friends, and you all stop watching it. So nothing's changed. It's just so dynamic right now because we all have these little things in our hands where the minute we don't like something, we have an action that we can take.
And a lot of times, though, jumping off of what Pam said, this is the challenge I think with young people is that if you who I like tell me that Arius, for example, is against something that I believe in, I won't look into it. I'm not going to contact her. I'm not going to even Google it. I'm just going to start canceling her, and I'll retweet what you two have said because it's a fact.
Yeah.
And that's, there's an interesting study that was done. Shoot, I wish I had this prior to the call, but I can look it up. That more young people get their news and facts off of social media, like TikTok and Snapchat,
than any other source,
than a legitimate news source, and they won't Google to find that.
Yeah,
we're trying to fix that through cyber civics.
right. And you'll see those numbers on the Pew Research Center website, where they're really tracking that kind of sourcing. It's
and I see Arius's eyeballs going back and forth between the chat box. Do we have anything that we need to address?
Oh, no, the creator of the question is here and was just saying thank you for responding. So happy to have him here.
Yeah, so I want to touch the second part of the question because I think it's the most important part, and it's the lack of critical thinking skills, which Rick just mentioned. And I think that is like a critical call right now. We need to help kids understand how to be critical evaluators of all the stuff that they're seeing on social media, and to dig deeper and to not just take a message at face value, but to find out who the author is and where they posted it and what their background is. I think that, I'm not the only one to just ring a bell on how urgent it is to teach kids these skills. So I think that is what we're seeing here with the whole cancel culture phenomenon.
And teaching it in some system like you all are doing is so important, because the last thing kids are hardwired to do when they're teens is to stop and think if they're feeling peer pressure, right? The social influence, being part of the gang, being one of the guys, all of those things are very important in a very strong, instinctive, emotional way. So expecting a kid to go, well, my best friend said, and to stop and think is unreasonable. They have to get in the practice.
Yeah. And that the other part of that too is, and what we always try to do with these talks is remember, this is just a tool, it's how we use it. And every time there's a bad example of how somebody uses it, there's a great example of how it's used. And the same thing exists with cancel culture. And I know, Rick, you can probably give us examples of when cancel culture has been a really wonderful thing.
Yeah, so, well, okay, I don't know why Disney seems to be picked on so much, but there was a whole issue that was raised around the live action Mulan movie because parts of the film were shot in areas, I'm going to mess this up, but areas that are under conflict with social rights people regarding the Muslim Uyghurs. Thank you. That was I couldn't come up with it. And so they started saying, ban Mulan was the hashtag that came out of that. But that raised awareness about something that I'm sure a lot of young people had no idea about unless their parents listened to NPR or something about what's going on in China, because you had to figure out why people were saying ban Mulan. Similarly, the Me Too movement was kind of the big one where it rallied a bunch of young people over social media. The George Floyd protests, it's used very, very much with the youth climate change movement. All of them are using social media and call out culture, cancel culture as a means of giving people focus and where to direct energy.
Right. Yeah. Pam, can you think of examples where it's been used in positive ways?
Yeah, I was going to add that when Jada Pinkett Smith and Will Smith boycotted the Oscars with the hashtag Oscars So White, that really took off, and they essentially boycotted the Oscars, canceled their membership, so to speak, at least for that year. But there was material change, and who knows how much it was directly, came from that, or just the raise in awareness. But 2019, the Oscars had a record number of people of color in the nominees instead of the all-white slate that it had been the year before. So calling people out, asking for accountability is really important. It's the same message you give your kids, being accountable for what you say and how it sort of reverberates through society, big things, little things, but they all have consequences.
Right. I love taking a look at the ways it can be used positively and giving kids agency and making change for things that are important. But again, it calls to those critical thinking skills to help a child really think through what that means and how to get to that point. Um, and really why we wanted to gather today is because we've all seen, unfortunately, how sometimes cancel culture can start turning into cyberbullying. Um, how can a parent recognize those signs? And I might just start by saying when we teach cyberbullying, we tell parents and kids that it's identifiable by 4 distinct characteristics. It's online, it's harmful, it's repeated, and it's intentional. And sadly, when I look at, kids canceling each other, it meets that same criteria. So do you agree with
I
that,
think
Pam?
I think the word intention is really a good one,
Yeah.
because especially when you're talking about something that could be a calling out for some kind of social justice versus canceling, which is, in my mind, sort of a bullying angle, is to say to the kid, what is it that this person is trying to get done? It's the same with, like, what's the agenda of the guy selling soap, or giving me that ad? Why are they doing this? What are they hoping to accomplish? Is that the best way of doing it? Right? It's pretty clear that somebody who's just saying mean things to another person doesn't have a very clear positive outcome in terms of social change. So
Right.
that's a way to make that very material for kids, is to try and look at the intention.
Yeah. And Rick, I know you had some specific examples of kids who had been canceled and what happened to them.
Um,
Or was that
well,
Pam? One of you put some
I
examples in
put
the chat.
something up.
yeah,
Okay.
I was like,
Sorry.
oh,
Well,
I
wow.
can
you
tell by the
go,
look
Rick.
on your face that wasn't you.
I was like, I better fake this really quick.
Well, being in the field of psychology, I hear a lot about the negatives of social media because, of course, let's face it, people who are therapists have a self-selected population. It's people who, need help. That makes sense. But there are a lot of instances of kids who get canceled because they're teens. It's so immediate. It's not canceling because of some kind of social cause. It turns into bullying, and it's sustained, and they become totally excluded from this sort of social environment. Leads to depression, all kinds of things that can be very serious, and in some cases has even led to kids trying to take their own lives. The terrible thing about the fact that it gets labeled as canceling is that there's this kind of moral righteousness that goes along with the people who are canceling. Well, he once mentioned the word, whatever word it was that he mentioned, and that's bad. No redemption, sorry, prodigal son, you're canceled, right? And so it's, but they think they're doing good somehow, and that lesson really needs to go through, which I know you all teach. Give me credit for that.
So that's such a great point. And Arias, I'm going to just take a breather here and see if we have any questions that you want us to address as we keep going.
You're good going. I'll jump in
Okay,
if there is.
Well, the one question too that I think is interesting to ask a young person is, what's the point of this canceling you've been asked to do? Is there a point, or is it purely to just poke at somebody? So that's one thing. The other side is, what happens when the person does an apology? So for example, RuPaul got a lot of flack in the couple of years ago on RuPaul's Drag Race because he was using terms that were antiquated and offensive to the current transgender community, but when he was younger and in the scene, they were fine. And so he apologized and they made changes to the show. But to this day, he still gets crucified by certain people on social media because of things that they did in the past that the production has corrected. So I feel like we need to teach kids, like, okay, if you say I'm sorry and it's genuine and they're trying to be better, is that enough?
Yeah.
No kid wants to keep, my mom used to do this. I'll whisper it in case she's hearing. No, I did something. I remember doing something wrong when I was in elementary school.
I'm live tweeting this to her. So.
Oh my God, if she could figure out Twitter, God bless. But the thing was she kept bringing it up. And I remember one day saying to her, I said I was sorry. Would you stop that? And it was this first time that I felt like I had a voice to her. And I don't think she realized like what she was doing, but it's that poking, like, oh, look, you can't keep hitting a person, the dog on the nose for something it did if it's not potty trained. That's a really bad analogy, but
Yeah. But it kind of, like that started me thinking about what we talked about earlier is all of this is really about empathy, right? Like people make mistakes all the time. And when you're a kid, you make mistakes and that's your job is to test new ideas and beliefs and words and see how they fly. And when other kids jump on that and make a quick judgment, it's not allowing that growth to happen. And it's certainly not being an empathetic, caring person. And so I think all of this goes back to that very elemental thing. Treat others as like you'd like to be treated. Give them a chance to speak. Don't jump all over them for something they might have said in jest or as a mistake or to just try a feeling on. So
Yeah,
I have a,
oh, go ahead.
is that okay? There's just a great question that I think would help kind of flesh out the conversation. So the question is, where's the line? If we don't cancel a racist or transphobic comment per se, what do we do instead to raise awareness? So if you guys could speak to that, that would be wonderful.
That's the doctor's question, Dr. Pam.
You have to speak up. You just have to do it in a way that takes responsibility for owning it. In other words, you aren't calling them out. You're not saying they're a bad person, just like you don't do with kids, right? You don't label, you teach and say, this is a problem. Here's why it's a problem. I'm no longer buying your book because of this. I hope you can change. I hope you can address this. No one ever changes because they were shamed, right? It doesn't work. When you attack someone, they defend and they entrench. If you want people to change, you have to meet them where they are and show them why it's a problem. It's so important to understand all this fighting, all this conflict is all that's doing is making a bigger division.
And sadly, I think kids are watching adults do this. We're so like on both sides of the aisle and we can't seem to find compromise anywhere. And so it's so hard to teach these lessons to kids when the examples they see are telling them the exact opposite.
For sure. And when they fear that they'll get canceled by being an upstander.
Yeah.
We have another question. How do we get people to understand that things were different when we were younger and what we may have said or done 20 years or so ago did not reflect who we are today?
It's funny. I'm going to let Rick jump in here in a second, but I just keep thinking about how it's so important to teach kids about digital reputation, which is really that speaks to that once you put something online, it stays online forever. So you're impacting the reputation of whoever you're calling out, but also your own reputation as somebody who's just jumps on other people, and in 20 years, that might embarrass you. So another great reason for kids to really be taught that what you put online stays online forever. Think before you post. What do you think about that, Rick?
Yeah, it's interesting because this happened last year during it happened around the George Floyd protests, but I think it was Viacom. Networks were hiring private investigators to go into their celebrities' previous Twitter feeds and Instagram and whatnot to see if they had started saying anything racist, transphobic, homophobic, and it became a big thing where probably one of the most notable in terms of mainstream was the actor Hartley Sawyer, who played a character on the Flash TV show, was fired for making sexist, racist jokes on his Twitter, and they had been wiped. But of course, people can take screenshots because the internet is forever. The woman who, why can't I think of her name, who did Dance Moms, Abby Lee Miller, she got canceled by Lifetime because of her racist comments. And a lot of the characters on Vanderpump Rules, Bravo had to do a big cleaning on a lot of their shows with talent. So, that is the big lesson, I guess, to some young people is that there are ramifications. Like, thank God, when, I would try out stuff when I was starting stand-up comedy back in the day and the stupid things I said. And I'm like, oh, Rick, white boy, that's a racist joke. And you didn't realize it at the time because you're living in your own entitled ignorance, Yeah.
And kids need to go through that period where they do stupid things and make mistakes. And it's unfortunate when they're calling out and counseling one another for doing something that's so normal and typical for being an adolescent.
Yeah, I think the only way you can address that is by trying to get kids to think about, if they make a mistake, would they like to be given another chance? Would they like to learn to do something better? And try and keep it away from social media when you're using the example. You know, you forgot to feed the dog, you know, shall I throw away the dog, or would you like another chance? And well,
You're
you
canceled.
get my point. But
We're gonna have PETA coming after us right now, Pam. Okay.
Yeah, they're gonna
no,
cancel.
but what?
fast.
Wait, yeah, okay. I was trying to use an example that would take it away from social media, where a kid would actually have some emotional attachment to, if they wasn't their own sense of growth, which is, you know, unusual at the age of 10 or 12 or 16 even, to something they care about, and understanding that people make mistakes and that you can change and you can do things over, where we're not allowing people to do that on social media. And I think that's where this is also dangerous, is that we are not educating. I'm all for calling people out. I'm all for standing up for what you believe in. I'm all for boycotting the products that you don't, you know, believe in and support. But make sure, well, whatever the message is, that you're modeling the kind of behavior you want to see in your kids, so that they're sticking to values, they're sticking to the reasons why something, and they're not just getting personal. First rule of arguing, don't, you know, it's not about being personal, it's about the behavior.
Yeah, and so having this conversation makes me think that when this is over and I post the video, I'm also going to share a lesson from cyber civics that is so powerful that parents can use with their kids, called Real People, Real Feelings, just as a reminder to kids that behind every screen is a real person with real feelings. So hopefully that'll be helpful, because I think that is what is at the root of a lot of this, especially for children. And there was another question actually that came in, and they asked us not to share their name, but the question was, what to do if your kid is the counselor?
Okay.
It's a legit one, because it's not like this is happening magically out there, you know? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So what would you do, Rick, if it was your kid that was the counselor?
Well,
You cancel him.
I cancel him. I kick the kid out. What? No, I mean, I think God, it comes back to the old mom teaching you the Catholic stuff, you know, doing unto others, right? And the notion that you're not fallible, or you're not infallible, sorry, you're not infallible. You make mistakes. And if we, you know, didn't if we didn't forgive and let you learn and grow, then how fair would that be to you? So you need to be able to give that to somebody else.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what you just described there is a parent who is communicating, not lecturing.
Yeah.
That anytime you see a problem behavior with a kid, first of all, you need to find out why this is going on. Nothing happens in a vacuum. You know, maybe they want to be cool with their friends. You know, maybe there's, you know, they're feeling bad about themselves. Maybe they're mad because they can't see their friends right now. But have a conversation to talk through what it is they think they're accomplishing. I mean, Rick, you made that point earlier, that it's the goal. You know, what do they think they're trying to do? And, you know, and if they just want to feel more powerful, you know, if they just don't like the person, then you need to take some steps, monitor the situation, and make sure that they start doing exactly what you're talking about, Diana, is having exercises in empathy, or doing unto others, or however you want to frame that, where you try and create situations where you're switching it way better than the example with the dog, so that they're seeing the other side.
And you know, what I always tell students when things like this come up is, as much as possible, face-to-face communication is pretty awesome. Like, it's a great way to solve problems before you try to hash them out online. It's not permanent. It's not gonna come back to haunt you. So that's number one. Number two is just how to be an upstander. And again, what we tell students is, like, being an upstander doesn't mean you have to go to the bully or the counselor and have a confrontation. It means you can give a kind word to the person who's the target, or it means you can tell a trusted adult and ask for help, or it means that you can report it to the network where it's happening. So there's lots of ways to be an upstander that are, you know, not so scary for a kid. And to teach a child how to do that is hugely beneficial, because they'll be able to use that again and again throughout their online life. So
yeah, and people don't learn things overnight, right? They get it a little bit right one time, or maybe a little bit wrong one time. But the important thing is to practice it and to understand that that's the right course of behavior, and to to sort of support the right actions, even if it didn't quite turn out right.
Right. And as you can see here, we've covered so many topics that kids need to know about: critical thinking, what is cyberbullying, how to be an upstander, empathy. I mean, these are all different and specific lessons that build together to help a kid learn how to be a wonderful digital citizen.
And person.
Yeah. So, all right. The last thing we have on here are a bunch of takeaways for parents. We have covered most of them. Can you two think of any that we have not?
One thing that I don't think this is on here, but in the course of the conversation, Cyber Civics has that document on being able to spot fake news. Is it credible, real, something, something?
Yeah.
I didn't want to say, but is it crap, right? That's the.
You can say it.
Okay. But I think that would be an important thing for us to give to parents as well, because you can apply those same lessons. Sorry, for the people who don't know, it's 4 ways to look at a news story to determine if it's real or fake news. But I think the same thing can be applied to a canceling.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, you're asking me to cancel somebody. Well, is the canceling credible? Is this a real thing?
Yeah, who's the author? Where are they from? Do they have reputable credentials? What's the purpose? What's the point? Do they have a point of view? All those things you're right, you can apply it to anything you see online, so that you're not just sharing things without understanding what it is.
That's so powerful too, because what you're doing when you do that is you're taking people out of their emotional brain and you're putting them into their critical thinking brain, because kids are full of feelings. They're just like little feeling bags, right? And so you need to validate those feelings. I understand that you're excited about this, or you're sad, or you're something, but let's move over here and ask these questions and see how that lines up with, with what you're trying to do, so that you can move them away from just being reactive and part of the team and whatever it is that's driving them.
Right. And unfortunately, the internet happened so fast to us that us adults didn't get all that training. So we're making all the mistakes. And I just hope that the next generation can do it better. We're working hard. So Arius, before we close out, are there any last questions you'd like us to address? Or comments that we should know about?
There was I think you guys already answered this, but there was a wonderful question about just how do we weave this informally into the discussions we're having with kids, both within school context and outside of school, so in our families. If you had any other ideas to just kind of practice this kind of critical thinking.
Yeah. So we're going to share some of that. And for those of you who don't know where to find this, on the Cyberwise website, under About, there's a thing that's called Cyberwise Chats. And I think Arius is going to put it in the chat box right now. So we're going to actually share our show notes. Give me a day or two to put them together. That will give these takeaways for parents and give you ideas on how you can do this with your children. I'll throw a lesson in there as well that you can practice with your children. I'm going to go to Rick, because I think a lot of people here don't know about Parentology, and it's a great resource. Can you talk a little bit about it?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, Parentology has been around for about 2.5 years now, going on 3. And our focus primarily is about parenting and tech, the crossroads between those two things. And so one of the things that we like to do is when a thing starts rising like this, like cancel culture, or last month we talked about, or last meeting we talked about TikTok trends, we like to try to cover that, and we try to cover it from as much as possible. We have a lot of young writers on staff who are in with it and can talk about examples of like what cancel culture or call out culture is and the differences. And I just threw into the group chat, there was an article that Julie Tolar, one of our writers, did, and she interviewed Pam about it, but it's how to navigate cancel culture. So it's a guide for parents to kind of help them with that sort of these topics.
Right. And then thank you, Rick. I think a lot of people didn't know about all those great resources, so I appreciate that. And Pam, I'm gonna embarrass you now, because I think a lot of people don't know what a prolific writer you are, and a lot of your posts are on your website for the Media Psychology Research Center. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, actually, the posts are on my personal website, PamelaRutledge.com. But yeah, as a media psychologist, I've spent my career taking psychology and trying to understand how people behave related to media, whether they're creating it or participating in it. But what I was going to say to answer Arius's question is, you have content every day to start a conversation, and it's called the news. Real news, fake news. There's all kinds of these examples that we're pulling are all public knowledge. And so anytime you pull something, you can start a conversation with kids. Hey, did you see this? What do you think about this?
Yeah.
How would how would you have handled this? And act confused. Kids love it when when they know more than their parents.
Yeah.
So that you can.
No, I'm saying, I'm so glad you brought that up. That's such a good point, because that's how we advise our teachers before a lesson. Look at the news, because there's going to always be a current story that you can open your lesson with. It never fails. There's going to be something every single day.
Yeah, people are that stupid.
Yeah, we make these mistakes over and over, and so many teachable moments out there. So really good. And thank you, Pam. I just wanted to say, everything I know is because of Pam. She was one of my teachers when I got my master's in media psychology, and I learned so much from her, and she got me into this mess, is what I like to say. And ended up writing Raising Humans in a Digital World largely because of Pam. But within that book, there's so many, like maybe 2 dozen activities that families can do together to build all these skills to raise a good human in the digital world. And that's really what the bottom line here is having these humans understand that we all make mistakes. We have to have empathy for one another. When we use the internet, to use it kindly and wisely. So that's really what we want our kids to walk away with today. All right. Any last words? Are we good? We good with the chat box, Arius?
There's so many good questions. There was just one other one. I know we're closing it up, but it was just, where do you believe that this comes from? Where does cancel culture stem from? And is it from kids? Is it from like a deep social place within us as humans? Where do you guys think this all started, was the question.
It's an innate social behavior that people use to establish social norms and create groups. You've heard of the Spanish Inquisition. You've heard of the McCarthy Red Scare. Of all of these times in history where people have used some version of a cancel culture, the worst penalty from the Catholic Church, excommunication, right? The most painful thing, what do you think a timeout is? It's taking away social contact. The body responds to that as physical pain, literally as physical pain neurologically. Yes. So cutting people out away from social connection, cutting them off from society is the most painful punishment known to man.
Yeah. And all these behaviors are just so much easier to execute today because you can do it with the push of a button. And all of a sudden we can all become the person who decides what we like and don't like, and then tell that to everyone online. So everything old is new again.
I know, right? Bell bottoms have been around twice.
Really? I only wear sweatpants. I don't know about you.
And the new couture, right?
Yeah. All right. Did we do it, folks? Are we there, Arius? Anything else?
We're there.
What's next, Diana?
What's next? So we decided next time we're going to all four get together again on the first Tuesday of next month, which is April. And we're going to talk about chat apps, because we've been getting a lot of questions about Clubhouse, which is brand new, and Omegle, which is not new, but seems to have bubbled up again, especially amongst kids. So we're going to talk about the highs and lows of chat apps and what parents need to know about them. So stay tuned. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us, and thank you for making time today. I hope everyone has a wonderful day, and be kind online, everybody. All right. Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.